Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm Onur Sultan from Beyond the Horizon International Strategic Studies Group. Beyond the Horizon is a non-profit Brussels-based think tank specializing on defense and security-related matters. Today, we will discuss an extremely important subject with distinguished guests. The subject is, as you know, the acute crisis in Lebanon. As you know, in October 2019, the country was subject to protests, which we call today as revolution. And after the protests that started in Beirut, quickly kind of spread across whole Lebanon. And the protesters started to want the resignation of the Prime Minister, Saad al-Hariri, at the time. After 12 days of protests, the Prime Minister submitted his government's resignation, and the protesters continued to make their protests, and the people rushed to the banks to withdraw their monies in expectation of a financial crisis. The parity between USD, US dollar, and Lebanese lira at the time before the revolution was $1 to 1,500 Lebanese liras. After these events, it doubled and came to the level of 3,000 Lebanese liras. In January 2020, a technocrat government was formed under the leadership of Hassan Diab. And after the explosion in August 2020 in the port of Beirut, the government had to resign after 1 week facing kind of public frustration and anger. Since then, there has been continuous efforts to find a solution to this political deadlock, but unfortunately, a government has not been formed in the meantime. So the problem is that since then, the Lebanese lira has been making a free fall, and the people, there's a big kind of economic challenge that is coming together with this political deadlock. As of today, the rate for USD to Lebanese lira is around 18,000 Lebanese liras to US dollar, which means 12 times as before when compared to the level before the revolution. Today, with our distinguished guests, we will discuss this acute crisis in Lebanon. So, as of today, as I said, there are lines in front of the gas stations for the people who want to get gas. There's a shortage of medicine, and the people are really frustrated, and the crisis is deepening. So we need to discuss all these things and get a better grasp of what is really happening in Lebanon. For that, today we have, as I said, three distinguished guests. Let me briefly introduce them to you. Our first guest is retired General Maroun Hitti. Sir, welcome.
Thank you.
General
I'm honored to
Hitti,
be with you.
Thank you, sir. That's our honor. General Hitti served as officer and general for more than 38 years in Lebanese armed forces. And after his retirement, he served as special defense and military advisor to the prime minister between June 2017 until January 2020. General Hitti was Deputy Chief of Staff for Planning, J5, from September 2012 until September 2016, where he handled the planning for long and medium-term strategic vision. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
Mr. Obada Ladan is an economic and financial journalist with 18 years of experience covering business strategies and macroeconomy, with a special focus on the banking sector and central banks policies in the Gulf region and Lebanon. He is currently a senior producer in the business desk at Al Arabiya, based in Dubai, and a regular columnist for Lebanese media services. He previously worked as the business editor, head of business department for Al Rai newspaper, the leading daily in Kuwait, and as a pundit for several TV channels in the region. Ubada, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Great honor to be with you.
It's our honor. And finally, as our third speaker, we have Mr. Ibrahim Jauhari together with us. He's a senior political analyst, electoral expert, and university instructor focused on political science, diplomacy, US foreign policy, and Lebanese history. He has written extensively on various issues on the 128 Lebanon website alongside Beyond the Horizon, tackling various issues such as the political causes of economic crisis, the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, and the political intricacies of the Lebanese electoral system. He is also the manager of Data Liberation Project, focused on publicly publishing the raw electoral data of the previous parliamentary elections of 2018, 2009, and 2005. Welcome, Ibrahim. Welcome. And so I just want to mention a few kind of housekeeping rules for this webinar. We're going to conduct this webinar in 3 rounds. In the first round, I'm going to ask for each of our guests 1 question, and they will answer those questions for 10 minutes. Then we will have a second round to answer or intervene in the discussions in the first round, and also answering another question in the second round for 5 minutes. And then we are going to be left with 10 minutes for answering your questions and answers. Should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them by clicking on the Q&A button below your screen. And hopefully we will get answers to them for you with such distinguished guests together with us today. So I want to turn to Ibrahim for my first question. Ibrahim, you're a political scientist and you have been following the elections in Lebanon for a long time now. As you know, Lebanon has been in a political deadlock, and politicians are not reaching an agreement since the explosion and the resignment of the government of Hassan Diab. And in February this year, the Patrick Boutros Ghali called for an international conference led by the UN in order to find a solution to the crisis. Do you see a new coalition being formed in the coming weeks, if not days? Are there any international efforts that you want to mention? And specifically, what prospects for a solution do you see in the coming days?
Hi, well, Urshi, thank you, and I'm very glad to be here. Yes, the situation is dire. Lebanon is now in its 10th month of political, it's even worse than deadlock, it's paralysis. Nothing is happening at all. The government that's supposed to be formed has not been formed. The caretaker government that should be dealing with at least the daily issue as per se, per the constitution, has not been doing its job. The people are left to their own accord. While many different international effort has been tried, first immediately after the port explosion, the 3rd largest explosion in the world happened. France, led by President Macron, led an international effort to try and come and find a solution, which in brief was the idea that, okay, we understand there are political issues, there are political disagreement, there are politicians that want a bigger pie of a bigger part of the pie. But let's put all that aside. Let's form a government of mission, un gouvernement de mission, that is tasked with doing the very urgent and needed reforms that will enable us as Lebanon to start receiving foreign aid, starting by the IMF and then by the now 3 years old SAD conference that was organized in order to help Lebanon with the launch of several big infrastructure projects, especially on infrastructure. Unfortunately, for many reasons and mainly for political balances and calculation, this government official did not pan out. The prime minister who was tasked, who was elected or nominated to do it, resigned after 2 weeks. And after that, Prime Minister Hariri, the previous prime minister who, as you mentioned, resigned after the eruption of the different manifestation and demonstration, he took it upon himself to form a government that is in spirit with the French initiative, as it was called, President Macron effort, which is forming a government that is solely focused on making the reforms, pushing the country forward, making a deal with IMF, and then getting SAD. unfortunately, again, political paralysis, political deadlock, and 10 months later, we are here. It has been a slow decline. The World Bank, in its previous report, called it a decline that is premeditated. It's not just haphazardly. The World Bank accused the political elite in Lebanon of not doing anything and letting the whole political and economic structure slowly erode, going into a full free fall. And you can see it. Yani, in the summer, first you had the dollar that was at 6, 7, 8. It slowly declined, and now it's rapidly. At the same time, you had the basic necessities. You had electricity, you had medicine in drugstore, you had food that was still subsidized. Slowly, but with premeditation, all of these help, all of these subsidies, all of these, if you want, social networks have been eroding, slowly being removed. We are now at a point that I just came from Saida. It took me almost double the time. Why? Because the line that you also spoke about in front of the fuel station has become monstrous. We are talking about 3-4 kilometers of line, people sitting in full July, let's say June, July heat, and people who visit Lebanon. And I hope one day we become, we back to our tourist attraction status. When you come to Lebanon, you know, in these 3 months, the sun really hits hard. People turn their car off, because if you're gonna stay in line for an hour, all the fuel that you're gonna put is gonna be lost. And for me, there's only one word to describe this line and all the situation that people are going through is in Arabic is zul. In English, it's making people feel so bad, so destroying their not honor, but destroying their will, if you want. And for me, it's really sad. Lebanon was not that and is not this. You're asking me about a political consensus, a political movement. Unfortunately, it seems that even internationally, the friendly countries, France at the forefront, the US, the Arabs, the Gulf, have slowly lost hope and maybe interest. I don't see anything at the horizon happening. What I see is, and I think internationally, now they are trying to stop Lebanon from going into a failed state. And for that, there are efforts to help the army, but we are talking about minimal help to make it maintain. Meanwhile, there are also efforts to push for election. As you know, we have election in around 10 months. For me, it is, I think, the only solution to get out of the political deadlock. And I'm not talking about change, although I hope, but the political parties have such a strong and hermetic control of the political life that it's gonna be a tough battle. But there are glimmers of hope, and especially if the alternative parties are united. There are push and a lot of pressure from the international community to make sure that elections are held on time. And for me, this is crucial. And the two issues I just raised, helping the army make sure that the country does not fall into a failed state, and make sure that the elections are held on time, are the only way out of the problem. The elections are important because even if we are not capable of completely overturning the political landscape, at least the election will allow for the nomination of a new prime minister. The election, because after the parliamentary election, you have gonna have a presidential election, the election of a new president, and the election of a new speaker of parliament. These 3 nominations, in addition to 128 new MPs or returning MPs, will at least bring some new blood into this awful, and believe me, awful paralysis that is taking its toll on all of us. I don't know where I am in time.
You're fine, Ibrahim. Thank you very much for your remarks that you have made. So basically you suggest and you think that a new reshuffling of the cards in the political landscape with the change of the president, the prime minister, and the leader for the parliament is going to bring a new blood, a fresh blood to the system, and hopefully is going to open the blocking, this blocked system. And,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
but just one point.
Sure.
The change might not come, but even electing the same people again will allow the
Yeah.
system to be blocked, because we all know it's a consultation system and maybe the big names will not change. But re-electing them will allow the political process to start anew. That's a very important point to note.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And we will revisit this issue of supporting the armed forces with general, and hopefully we'll touch upon that. But now I want to get back to Obade about the economical situation. I think we need to get a better grasp of this economical situation in the country. Obade, how large is the size of the economic and financial crisis nowadays? And what repercussions on the Lebanese societal and political landscape has it had so far? What do you think? Can you unmute yourself, Ubade? We cannot hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Brian was talking about the queues in front of the petrol stations. Actually, unfortunately, things has changed enormously since the eruption of the so-called revolution in October 2019. At the beginning of the crisis, people were outrageous about their money in the banks. They were nervous about what was discussed at that time about the hikes in taxes or fees. So now people are thinking about their basic needs. When we talk about the economic situation in the country now, we are talking about the very basic needs. We're talking about food supplies, about fuel, internet, the struggling schools and universities, medicine. So if we take it from the Maslow's hierarchy perspective, we are talking here about the physiological needs. Then we can talk later on about the safety needs, the psychological needs, and then at the top of the hierarchy comes the self-actualization needs. So when we talk about the basic needs, I think in countries like Lebanon, with the resources, with the available resources, with the diaspora, with the human capital available in Lebanon, I think Lebanon should have adequate resources to provide these needs. So I think the crisis, the nature of the crisis, the nowadays crisis, is temporal, and it could be addressed swiftly. Once we form a government, all these hurdles could be resolved swiftly. But I have other things to worry about on the longer term. We have to be worried about the whole model, about the competitive advantages that Lebanon has reckoned on all over the decades before to create the wealth, to have this wealth for the Lebanese people, and to maintain this the lifestyle that the Lebanese people has enjoyed to a certain extent all over the decades before. If I go back to the current crisis, I think it's the result of inaction. And this inaction is a kind of passive decision made by the politicians or made by the political system. It's a passive decision not to make any decision. They decided not to make any decision. So we kept on using the reserves, the mandatory reserves, all over this, this period since the eruption of the crisis in October 2019. We have used almost half of the reserves of the central bank. The central bank had 31 billion US dollars in October 2019. Now we are talking about 15 to 16 billion dollars. So we've spent half the reserves. It could be someone decided to do so, but I don't think that Riyad Salami has decided, the governor of the central bank has decided to spend all these reserves. It's the inaction, it's the dysfunctional state that spent all this money, and half of this money was spent on providing the subsidies for food and medicine, fuel, and the other half was spent to finance the transfers of money, the discretionary transfers abroad. So at the end of the day, now we are left without these reserves, and the inaction and the passive decision has put all the Lebanese people in a situation where they have to choose whether to continue having the fuel, the little fuel that is accessible with subsidized price, or to remove this, or to have these subsidies and keep the market forces have its role and has its play. So the main issue here is the struggle or the conflict among the political parties on the distribution of losses. And I think this is the main issue that is causing all this problem. Why the government was under the government of Hassan Diab, why wasn't they able to lead a transition or lead a restructuring in the financial sector and in the public finance? And why they weren't able to lead negotiation with IMF? Simply because the discord is still there between the political parties on the main issue, which is the distribution of losses. And in the absence of agreement between the political parties on this main issue, what's happening is distribution of losses on, I would say it's the status quo is distributing the losses. It's de facto. Let me say it's a de facto basis. It's going like that. We'll keep on using the reserves till the last usable dollar, and the weakest link in the system will bear the biggest chunk of the losses. And the weakest link here is the depositors, and not all the depositors. Those who are not, who don't have enough influence, or let me say, the enough wasta in the Lebanese system to have their money saved and transferred abroad. So, so we are going to a de facto distribution of losses. And once this distribution of losses is settled, then we can look what's left beneath the ashes and what's left in the economic model of Lebanon and the financial model, and what's and how we can rebuild this model on a different basis. If we want to talk about this model and what's left in this model and what could be saved from this model for the post-crisis era, I can assure that what's obvious, that what we have lost is the confidence in the banking system, the financial system. This banking system used to attract or to have inflows from the diaspora and from Arabs, some of the Arabs from the neighboring countries. And this money, this hard currencies, or let's say this dollars, were used by the banks to finance the system, to finance the government, and to some of it, a big chunk of it was parked in the central bank as deposits in the central bank. So now this confidence has eroded completely. So I don't think that we can rebuild this confidence in the coming years. This is one of the things that we have lost. One of the things that will remain in the system is the, of course, the geopolitical, the geographical location, the natural qualities of the country, and the human capital and the diaspora. Those are the three things that will be left and will remain with us, and we can capitalize on it to rebuild the economic and financial systems. But I think it will take a few years to settle all these losses in the system right now, and to know who will bear the biggest chunk of the losses. Once this is settled, then we can look how we can rebuild the system. Until that time, if there's no functional government, if the dysfunction in the government resumes, then we will go to de facto distribution of losses, and that's what's taking place right now.
Thank you, Bader, for your remarks. And you mentioned about the remittances and the importance of it to the system. And hopefully, after a kind of government is formed, you hope that this confidence can be restored again to again attract investment to Lebanon and those remittances. I want to turn to General Hitti right now. Sir, you have been following the discussion. We have covered the political situation and economical side of the crisis. And I want to discuss with you, based on the geopolitical location of Lebanon, what do you think the security landscape in the country is going to look like in the coming days, first of all? And the second, do you think any repercussions to the region based on this geopolitical location? Yeah, please.
Thank you. As an introduction, Lebanon today is chaotic and complex. It's a strategic slice of real estate on the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean, lying in an uneasy proximity to a hostile Israel and to what is now today the failed state of Syria. It is a country currently being fought over and pulled apart. Lebanon is experiencing an unconventional war. Let's be clear on that. Unconventional war, where actors are vying for power and control and using their positions of power and alliances to further their own parochial and regional agendas. But we have all to take into account that Lebanon's battles are not driven by religions per se. It is in part a cultural war as well as a conflict of communities in which Lebanon's sect operate more as tribes, the adherent being bound together for communal self-protection and survival rather than united via worship of a shared religious credo. I mean, for a Christian, being a Christian is not going on Sunday to churches and ring bells. So, speaking about the geopolitical domain very quickly, despite Lebanon's myriad problems, it remains of high geostrategic importance, making the country important to international and regional actors. I will speak very shortly about this and then go back to the security. For instance, the United States, they view Lebanon through the prism of its opposition to Hezbollah, Iranian expansionism, and the well-being of its ally, Israel. Europe, the United Kingdom, and France regards the survival of Lebanon as critical to a peaceful Middle East. It is also concerned that a potential collapse of the left or of the country will hasten a fresh exodus of refugees toward Europe. Israel views Lebanon almost solely through the prism of its own security, having long ago relinquished any territorial aspiration. This is my personal belief. And of course, it is extremely worried by what I call the international community's laxism that has led since 1991, the small cat that used to be Hezbollah to the big tiger that it is today. Syria, I don't like to use the word Syria as much as the Syrian regime. The Syrian regime, who has always played on two big wiles. One, its apparent hostility against Israel, and the second, having a handhold on Lebanon. So Syria has never accepted the notion of Lebanese independence, especially when I say Syria, the vulgar Ba'ath regime. So its influence on that country was great between 1990 and 2005, but it has declined since 2005 in favor of Iran. It has not declined coming to zero, but it has declined in favor of Iran. Iran's interest in Lebanon begins and ends with Hezbollah and its ability to serve as a factor of deterrence or of bringing instability for the Islamic Republic. We all like to use the word the malign influence of Iran through Hezbollah. There are other factors, other actors. I mean, Saudi Arabia, long a benefactor for Lebanon, has distanced itself from Lebanon under King Salman, viewing the country as ruled by unreliable figures who have surrendered it to Iran, which is in part very false, which is simplistic, in my opinion, like the stopping of the US 3 billion assistance that was promised in 2013 and that never came to materialize. Who should I say? Well, I would add Turkey, which is exploiting an opportunity in Lebanon caused by the absence of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries to build support and influence in Lebanon's Sunni community. Turkey's moves in Lebanon are worthy of close scrutiny in the month ahead. We have to keep an eye on them. I would shift now to speak a little bit longer about the security domain. Of course, it's easy for me to speak about the lab, and my views, I will try to be as objective as possible. It is not because I am a former LAF officer, I'm retired today, I'm in first reserve, in fact. So it is not because I belong to that body that I will praise this body, only praise. No, I see some deficiencies. We will talk about them while we'll be talking. But I'm very proud to say that no national institution has contributed more to relative stability in Lebanon than the LAF. It is the only functioning organization in Lebanon today that can legitimately defend the country and hold it together. It is the last bastion, in fact. This is an effect. Why is it like this? The LAF is a sample of the Lebanese society and bears in itself all the strengths and all the weaknesses that exist within the LAF society. With that difference, that the LAF strictly obeys to laws and regulations, and there is always a big deal of justice being made within the country, which is not the case within the Lebanese society. And this is an effect, I mean, this success is an effect to a genuine cross-confessional makeup and its strong, wide international support. I repeat, wide international support, because most of the support of the Lebanese armed forces come from partners and allies. So it is much to the credit of the LAF and its headquarters and its commander that they remain firmly wedded to the democratic process, while attempting, when I say firmly wedded to a democratic process, we understand in the Lebanese armed forces that we are in a, well, between brackets, shaking democracy, but nevertheless democracy, in which the civilian power have, or the civilian politicians have the power of life and death over the military. And this is how it should be. The LAF, without being an army of a regime, it will never be like that. It is a national institution, but the LAF will never take initiative. And we don't have this poor tradition of coup d'etat that used to prevail in so many states in the Middle East and in Africa. So they remain wedded, as I said, to the democratic process, whilst attempting to support the government and protect the people simultaneously. And here, if we make the balance between what the uprising was expecting from the LAF and what the government was expecting from the LAF, we can see that the Lebanese armed forces were successful in maintaining a balanced position between both. Maybe the uprising wanted the LAF to join it and topple the government, while the government wanted the LAF to bring down the uprising. The LAF didn't do either. So it's still in the middle. However, what is happening today to the LAF is an image of what is happening to the country. And the collapse of the country, which is a real possibility, will bring Lebanon into an ungoverned space, or in a worst case scenario, to descend into another civil war. LAF is, but at heart, I will speak for another, I'm looking a little bit at the watch just to calculate how much time I will have to keep talking. So it is by heart and disposition, a naturally Western leaning organization. We have to keep this in mind. The bulk of its funding comes from the United States, the UK, France, other NATO allies, and a little bit from Arab countries. And however, its dichotomy is that under the current government, all defense ministers, unfortunately, appointed by President Aoun, have been affiliated to parties allied to Hezbollah. This difference between a Western-leaning LAF and Hezbollah-linked defense ministers has created tensions between the LAF and the government. Talking about the budget, the LAF entire budget have been affected by the economic crisis and collapse of the Lebanese pound, and is further depriving the LAF command of its already scarce financial resources. The devaluation of the salaries can are lowering the morale across the force, resulting in an compromised state of combat readiness. I spoke here about combat readiness. It is not only a compromised state of combat readiness, it is also a compromised state of cohesion. Today, the main effect to put on the LAF to keep it together is cohesion. So everything has to be made to keep that body cohesive. So the main coping mechanism of the LAF is loyalty and sense of duty. The LAF has been, until today, able to withstand the pressure for the immediate today and for the future. But at the end, the Lebanese government may be unable to pay all civil servants, or will pay its civil servants with a so much devaluated Lebanese pound that the salaries will not be worth anything. And this will be a big drama, and including the LAF. A significant proportion of the rank and file will be looking elsewhere for sustenance should this happen. And here I can talk hours because my generation experienced such a situation during the Civil War. What are the non-state actors the LAF are dealing with? The main is Hezbollah.
Sorry, we're running out of time. Maybe we can get those remarks in the second round, huh?
Okay. So no. I will stop with that much, and I will leave everyone else to speak questions when time comes. Thank you.
I'm really sorry for the time constraint.
No problem. At the country.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Now, Ibrahim, I want to get back to you. Can you talk a bit about outbound migration from Lebanon? How serious is it? Can you also tap on just repercussions on the EU?
Yes. Look, one other aspect of the crisis that we didn't even get to, although it's very important, but that shows you how bad the crisis is that since the start of the Syrian civil war, we've had almost between 1.5, from 1 to 1.5, and I've heard numbers now totaling 2 million Syrian refugees that fled the war in Syria. They are still here. Some of them came back, some of them are still here. They are also another aspect of the problem that are creating tension, are creating further pressure on an already crumbling system and services, from electricity to water to internet to everything is slowly crumbling. These refugees have been a weight, but paradoxically, they have also been a source of fresh, what we call now, any new dollars coming into the country, we call them fresh dollars. They have been a source of constant fresh dollars because the international community has paying between 1.5 to 1.7 billion dollars a year in support of these refugees. And this money, these funds have been helping to a certain degree the Lebanese economy. So as everything in Lebanon, there is this tension between the weight and some positive aspect. Unfortunately, we are now entering a point where it's becoming more and more negative. And the situation, many of these refugees used to work in agriculture, in construction, and in any other such jobs, with all of these sectors suffering heavily, and with the Lebanese middle class being slashed, and most of their savings are inaccessible in banks or in liras and have become worthless. So they are turning to any job that can bring minimum of sustenance. So you have the Lebanese that are trying to get more jobs, and the Syrian whose their jobs have become less worthy. So you have this tension. And this pertain to dangerous trends, which are going for crime, and mostly, and this is where I think it becomes much more interesting for you and for Europe, is an increase in illegal immigration. In Lebanon, last year, for the first time, I think, since the war, we've had Lebanese citizens taking the boats and running to Cyprus. Some of them died, some of them arrived, some didn't, some are lost at sea. This, for me, symbolizes how bad the situation is. And in case of a further degradation, and we've seen that the trend is going down, it is not only foreseeable. I think we are facing a definite increase in illegal immigration. For the Syrian, it will increase. For the Lebanese, there are two roads or two ways. One of them is taking, like last time, boats up to Cyprus or sometimes even up to other countries. The other one, which has been a bit easier, is going to Turkey, and from there braving the borders into Europe, Bulgaria, and further north. This is a trend that will only increase. And this is where I go back to the issue that the European and the international community understand that, and they have been providing help to the army and to the security forces and to the refugees in order to make sure that another large wave of immigration does not happen.
Okay, thank you, Ibrahim. Thank you for this remarks. And do you have numbers about this, the number of the people who fled Lebanon and took exodus to Europe?
Yes, as Lebanese, last year, this is one of the projects I'm doing now, is overseeing and observing the numbers of boats that are leaving the Lebanese shore. From the start of the year till now, there have been 3 boats that have been caught. On each, there was around 60 to 70 passengers. Were mostly until now Syrians, but with a few Lebanese. Last year, we are talking
I think we had a bad connection, but hopefully Ibrahim is going to rejoin us. At his absence, I want to turn back to you, Ubade. I have one question for you. In the first kind of round, we heard about the prospects for the new government to be formed, and also you enlightened us about your kind of view on the economical situation. The general talked about the security situation in the country. So if you were in a position to recommend the government with a solution to stop the lira from losing its value and recover, what would it be as a kind of crisis management solution? And I have actually one question that has come from the viewers. It says, what advice can you give to the citizens regarding their blocked money in the banks? We cannot hear you, Bade. Can you unmute yourself? Sorry.
And it's a big issue. The blocked money in the banks, it's very hard situation. And I was talking about the de facto distribution of losses. So I think that the depositors are the weakest link in the system. So I'll get back to this point later on, but for now, we're talking about the weakening lira, or the weakening Lebanese pound. Actually, the nowadays problem is, the stems of the problem is, as you know, is in the twin deficit, the huge deficit in the fiscal balance and the huge deficit in the current account. And this resulted, that the central bank has to defend the peg and to use all the hoarded reserves, the dollars that was parked by the banks at the central bank, use all this money, all these dollars to defend this peg. And I mentioned before that he used almost 15 to 16 billion dollars all over the period since the eruption of the crisis in October 2019. So what can be done now? The mere solution for this crisis is to have some funding, some fresh dollar from outside, and the only source of this funding could come from the IMF. So no other way but to find a way to have a problem with the IMF, to have a program with the IMF, and to find some sort of settlement or with the creditors. You have to find a solution with the creditors because, as you may know, the Lebanese government has defaulted the payment or the payments of the euro bonds in March 2020. So no other way but to find a settlement with the creditors and to start a program with the IMF. But in the current situation, in the absence of a functional government, what can be done is to eliminate this discrepancy between the parallel market and the official rate of the Lebanese of the exchange rate. Now what's happening is that the price in the parallel market is almost around 18,000, while the official price is 1,500. So it's 12 or 13 folds. The real price is 12 or 13 folds the official rate, and we have many quasi official rates, namely the 3,900 rate, which is used for financing the imports of foods, and now it will be used for the fuel. So, but all these engineering by the central bank will not resolve the problem of the fuel and the shortage of supplies. If we keep on subsidizing the imports, the supplies will keep on be smuggled to the neighboring countries from one side, and it will be the importers in some way or another will take benefit from the difference between will take the advantage of the arbitrage advantage between the official rate and the subsidized rate. between the parallel, the real rate in the market and the subsidized rate. So the only way to find a solution is to eliminate this difference between the parallel market and the official market. Yes, many people will not find it affordable to buy fuel or to buy the food supplies, but at least you can provide the market with the necessary supplies. The bottlenecks now and the shortage in the supplies is due to the price fixing, and we have to make a decision here. We have to make a choice whether we go for a social price fixed regime, or we keep on with the minimum possible free market. We have to stick to the we have to stick to the market forces to a certain limit, and at least to keep the supplies flowing to the country. So and we have to notice that the banks are not providing any dollar for the importers to finance the imports. So all the burden is on the shoulders of the central bank, and this cannot be the case forever. So at a certain time, we have to eliminate this difference between the real market and the subsidized market.
Thank you, Bader. Thank you for these remarks. Ibrahim was speaking before he cut off the line. Please, Ibrahim, can you continue on the numbers of the outbound migration?
I'll be very brief, but you just had an experience of the crumbling of infrastructures when my internet suddenly went off. So I was telling you last year we had a couple of hundreds of Lebanese that immigrated illegally. And again, these were the numbers of the people who were caught. We don't know the number of people who were not caught, but this is illegal immigration. You have a much larger and more important and much with more negative consequences, which is the legal immigration, the brain drain that Lebanon is witnessing. In the last few months, there is at least between 200 to 300 doctors that left our top hospital in Lebanon, AUH, American University Hospital. We also had university doctors, we have engineers, we have technicians, we have young people full of life that want to change the country. They have been leaving in droves to any place that would take them, even to places that they would never have thought to go, even to work at McDonald's. For me, this is the most dangerous aspect, because Lebanon was known for its education, for its tourism, and for its health sector. The three are witnessing a very, very dangerous brain drain. And unfortunately, I will end on this bad note.
Okay, thank you, Ibrahim. Sir, I want to get back to you. There was an issue that we couldn't finish in the first round. Maybe you can comment on that a little bit further. But my question is going to be to you. Does the security problem, as you discussed in the previous round, also the perspectives that you reflected belonging to different actors in the globe, like the US and the EU, taking all those into consideration, how do you think the security problem in Lebanon is going to pose a challenge for those outsider actors, for EU, for the US? And thank you.
No, thank you, Onur. Listen,
yeah.
Well, I'm going to say a joke first, because I always thought that the most dangerous work in the world was to be in the army. It was not to work at McDonald's.
Yeah.
I'm making the joke for Ibrahim. Him and I are very good friends. Look, I agree with everything everyone has been saying. I mean, Ibrahim said that the solution in elections, Obada was speaking about, we call them financial solutions, that the central bank is trying to provide. It cannot go on forever and things like that. Look, no lip talk. Lebanon is a country under occupation. We are under Iranian occupation. Our national decisions, our sovereignty are taken into custody by Hezbollah, by Iran through Hezbollah, and with the complicity of Syrian regime and Syrian regime intelligence and all this stuff. Everything we are experiencing today as well, a bad experience is a direct result of the actual political authorities in Lebanon have aligned Lebanon with the axis of the 4 or 5 rogue countries in the world that are North Korea, Iran, Syria, the Bulgar Syrian Baath regime. I always like to say this epithet on that regime, and the Venezuela. This is the cause. Everything else will be treating symptoms. Providing assistance to the left, it's excellent, good. Everyone will like it. We love the left. Yeah, providing financial assistance, making elections. Do you really believe that elections will bring a solution in Lebanon? How? By bringing another majority of independentists, like it did in 2009. To what did it lead? It led to Mr. Nabi Berri closing the parliament and to Hezbollah and the Free Patriotic Movement squattering Martyr Square and blocking central Beirut for 2 or 3 years. It led to Hezbollah blocking the presidential elections, not accepting any president, not accepting elections to be held unless Aoun becomes president. Those are the causes of the disease we are today. Our disease's name is occupation. It is only when this occupation will be faced, will be named. So the first thing we have to say, we have to look in the eye of the guy and tell him, you are occupying Lebanon. You are bringing prejudice to Lebanon. And this is the first step, start speaking. And most of the Lebanese in the uprising have already stated it. The second is to start to take action. Start to take actions. How? It can go from civil disobedience and refusal. Look, I cannot imagine, when we say we have to avoid Lebanon to become a failed state. Frankly, I want Lebanon to become a failed state. I want my country to become a failed state. So I would open the door to the international community to intervene. It's a paradox here. It is a very Lebanese way to look at the things. We will not shift from the actual situation in which we are to a better situation as long as we are the hostages of Hezbollah and the hostages of Syrian regime and the hostages of Iran. Don't look anywhere else. You want a cure? Let's work on that. All the others are, well, like in Lebanon, we have a joke for such solutions. We name them giving paracetamol to a person who has cancer. So this is the place. No lip talk. Let's go to that. If you ask me, what are my perspectives for the next phase? For the next phase, unfortunately, here I agree with Brahim and with Obama, because it's going to get violent. It's going to get worse. And I'm not talking in a week or in 2 weeks. I'm talking in days. For instance, today, while driving back here, I was in downtown Beirut. I had something. I learned from a colleague that Beirut University Hospital, the Rafiq Hariri Hospital, has stopped its generators. Even its electricity generators have stopped supplying power to an hospital because they have no fuel. How long do you think this can go on? For hours. It cannot. I'm not talking about days. I'm talking about now. That to what this will lead. Listen, I have a big mouth. During one session, a year and a half ago, I asked a direct question to the central commander, the CENTCOM commander, General Mackenzie. And well, I'm a soldier. I'm not a, I don't know, neither an economist or whatever. So what I think security, I think
Sir? Yeah, I think the connection is not stable. Okay. Actually, I was supposed to pass to the questions, but now we have overgone our time. It's 3:02. So I will finish the panel for today. I really thank and we are grateful for the participation of guests, especially the General, Obad and Ibrahim. Thank you very much for joining us. And for the viewers here who are following the program, we are really thankful. Please follow us in the next events and hopefully we will provide insight. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Onur. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.